If there was a contest for being a bad town, Singapore would be the winner. And no, I'm not talking about Singapore in Asia. I'm talking about a small town called Singapore in Michigan, United States, that buried itself because of one simple mistake. This tiny, unlucky settlement was founded in 1837 by O'Shea Wilder. He had a dream to build a town and did just that, but he definitely didn't know how the city would end. After the first year, it struggled economically, but soon after, it found its path in lumber work. At its finest, it had a population of 300 people. In 1842, the city experienced a pretty hard winter. Its inhabitants were left with no food and no way of surviving. But by some miracle, they found a ship that had recently sunk near the town's coasts. Luckily, the ship was packed to the brim with all kinds of food. They also had one of the best lighthouses, but not for long because it fell down and got destroyed in a few years. People didn't restore it, saying that they didn't need one despite being a hotspot for ships. That's nice of them. Then a couple of years later, everything started going downhill, and half of the Midwest burned in a big fire. Surrounding towns turned into ashes, but this place remained intact. Trees were burned in the surrounding towns, but Singapore had an untouched forest ready to be harvested. They began cutting trees, particularly the white pine tree. This, of course, busted the town's economy. As we all know, cutting a lot of trees is pretty bad. But nobody could predict what would happen next, unless they were experts in dunes. The location of Singapore was unique. On the left side, they had a lovely beach by Lake Michigan. In front of them, there was a river, and everything else was a forest. But the most critical part of the town was the forest near the beach, which was sitting on top of sand dunes. I don't know if you know this, but trees don't usually grow in sand, but I guess this place was special. These dunes weren't like those typical ones in the Sahara or any other desert. Such dunes can only be found near the ocean or, in this rare case, on the coast of Lake Michigan. This formation can be more than 4,000 years old and as tall as 196 feet. Their formation is a pretty simple process. The river that enters the lake carries tons of sand. Then the sand is distributed all over the beach by waves. Later, it dries out and is blown by the wind, but not far. It's caught by all kinds of vegetation. And voila, you have a sand dune. This process has been heavily studied by scientists, and it's been concluded that plants play an essential role here. They stabilize the dunes by preventing the sand from being blown out, and the roots help the sand not to fall apart. Plus, they hold water, and if you've ever made a sandcastle, you know wet sand doesn't fall apart. If only the Singaporeans had known this before starting their tree-cutting business. Plants develop in a couple of stages. The first stage is called pioneers. Some plants begin the dune building process, but over time, they perish and become food for the next generation of plants, which is called scrub. In this category, tiny trees and vines are extremely vulnerable, but important for what comes next. If everything goes right, a rare thing in sandy areas will grow – a forest. This stage of plants is so unusual in such regions that it can only be seen in the US on the Atlantic coast or near Lake Michigan. Forests like the one in Singapore are 1 in a million because they mostly consist of white pine trees. That's one of the best woods for lumber. Now let me tell you a little secret. Those pines were the only thing keeping the sand dunes in place. Well, after they had cut down all the trees on the dunes, the Singaporeans realized they had made a massive mistake. After not so much time, the sand got dry, and guess what? The wind started carrying it right into the town. In a panic, they somehow moved their houses onto log boats, took them downriver, and unloaded them in the next town, Saugatuck. Some of the houses are still in use now. Some people were either stubborn or couldn't load their giant houses on logs, and they stayed in the town. A family lived in a 3-story house, and as the wind blew, the house was slowly getting covered with sand. They moved upstairs as the floors beneath them became unavailable. Eventually, they ran out of floors. Instead of Santa Claus coming down their chimney, they got a pile of sand. And when that happened, they finally decided to move out of Singapore. In 1894, the city was officially declared a ghost town. This is not an isolated case. Many houses are getting buried now. People are paying tons of money to remove sand from their homes, and most cases occur around Lake Michigan. There are also a few in Africa. The Sahara dunes can move and cover the whole of Europe. You might be wondering what's going on in Singapore today. Basically, it's a big pile of sand with a sign that says there is a whole town underneath. The sand preserves around 37 houses. Maybe one day, archaeologists will find the town and dig it out, restoring it once again in its final glory. But people who lived there said that it was not worth the effort. Many building projects have been proposed there, but historians believe the town is important from a historical perspective and are against building anything there. Whatever they do, let's hope they won't cut the trees down again. We can all agree that what happened in Singapore is terrible for people. But, unfortunately, it's not the only occurrence of its kind in the US. This time, trees and dunes had nothing to do with it. The next phenomenon, called the Dust Bowl, covered a large area, simultaneously affecting a few states: Kansas, Colorado, Oklahoma, Texas, and New Mexico. The first people who saw the land around these states weren't too happy about it and said it wasn't good for farming because it was too dry. They even called it the Great American Desert, since there wasn't any water or trees over there. But some people took it as a challenge and stayed there. They believed it would eventually rain and the land would magically become fertile. It happened in the 1900s, and many new machines helping farmers with their work were being developed. Unfortunately, they overworked the land in the next 30 years, making it even drier. And yeah, the rain they had been hoping for never arrived. Instead, a big drought occurred. It lasted for 10 years, which further worsened the situation. More than 1 million acres were affected by this colossal dust bowl. The drought worsened yearly, and eventually, the topsoil turned into dust blown around by the wind, covering houses everywhere. The dust even reached Washington, D.C. But not all hope was lost, since people started trying to revive the land. The Civilian Conservation Corporation began planting around 200 million trees from Texas to Canada to prevent the soil from being blown out. Farmers began implementing new techniques like crop rotation that helped retain water. Authorities even started paying farmers to start working on the land to improve the condition further. All this hard work started paying off, and by the 1930s, the dust blowing was reduced by as much as 65%. But since 75% of the topsoil has already been displaced, it took another 8 to 10 years for the region to fully recover.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.